What would you do if the wealth you built, the power you controlled, and the empire you ruled could not protect you from the one thing that matters most? Love. This is the story of Ethan Whitaker, a billionaire CEO who believed no one was irreplaceable. In a moment of cold calculation, he fired Claire Bennett, the secretary who quietly carried his world for 3 years. But what happens when the very woman he dismissed turns out to be the key not only to his company's survival, but to his own healing, from the glass towers of Seattle to a small wooden community center in Tacoma? This story is about two lives divided by pride and fear, then drawn back together by fire, loss, and the slow rediscovery of what it means to serve instead of control. Will Ethan learn that true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in dignity? Will Claire allow herself to trust the man who once made her invisible and can love, once broken, be rebuilt not by promises, but by small, steady acts of change? Stay with us, like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. And let's begin. The morning rain draped South Lake Union in a veil of gray. From Ethan Whitaker's corner office on the 40th floor, the glass walls caught streaks of water like tears refusing to stop. Beyond the bay, a ferry sounded its horn, low and mournful, echoing across the damp skyline. Inside, the air was sharp with the scent of polished steel and recycled air, everything controlled, everything ordered, everything designed to reflect precision. At precisely 8 a.m., the boardroom filled. Men and women in tailored suits adjusted their laptops, whispered to assistants, and exchanged glances over the glowing screen that displayed one word in bold letters: recall. Whitaker Dynamics had built its reputation on cutting-edge robotics, but last week, a product failure had landed on the front page of the Seattle Times. Investors were circling like hawks. Questions demanded answers, and the one person Ethan counted on to prepare every legal brief, every contingency folder, every line of defense was not ready. Claire Bennett entered quietly, almost invisible in her navy dress and worn leather heels. She carried her notebook against her chest the way a soldier might hold a shield. Around her neck, a knitted teal scarf clung damply from the drizzle outside. She had been at the emergency room with her father until dawn. His Alzheimer's had spiraled into a terrifying episode that left her shaken but unwilling to admit weakness. She placed a folder in front of Ethan. It held the morning briefings, color-coded and tabbed with the precision that had defined her 3 years by his side. But the recall files, the legal packet that the board now demanded, were missing. Howard Blake, chairman of the board, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Mr. Whitaker, do we have the legal groundwork for today's press briefing?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He did not look at Howard. He looked at Claire. "The recall documentation," he said evenly, his voice carrying the chill of Elliott Bay in midwinter. "Where is it?" Claire's lips parted. For a moment, she considered explaining. The hospital, the fluorescent lights, her father's trembling hands, her mother's worried eyes. But explanations sounded like excuses, and excuses had no place inside Whitaker Dynamics. "I'll have it assembled immediately," she said, steady but quiet. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared his throat. The silence between Ethan and Claire stretched taut, like a wire pulled to breaking. "For 3 years," Ethan said, still looking at her. "You have anticipated every detail. You have never failed me, not once. And now, when the company's future is balanced on a knife edge, you come to this table unprepared." His words landed like blows, each one measured, deliberate. Claire lowered her gaze to her notebook, tracing the edge of the leather with her finger. Howard intervened softly. "Perhaps she only needs an hour." "We can," Ethan raised his hand. "No. In this business, timing is everything. Trust is everything. Once either is broken, there is no repair." He opened the leather folio before him, withdrew a single page, and signed it with his Mont Blanc pen. The sound of the nib scratching paper felt louder than the rain outside. He slid the document across the glass table toward Claire. Her eyes flicked down. 2 words stood stark in black ink. Severance agreement. For a long moment, the The room was utterly still. Claire's face betrayed no anger, no protest, only a calm resignation, as if she had always known this day might come. She gathered the paper with steady hands, tucked it into her notebook, and closed the cover with a quiet snap. Around the table, whispers stirred. No one is irreplaceable. One director murmured. Ethan caught the words and repeated them silently, almost like a prayer to his own need for control. Claire rose. She smoothed the crease in her dress, adjusted her scarf, and offered the smallest nod. "I'll clear my desk," she said. Nothing more. Her composure unsettled Ethan. He had expected tears, perhaps a plea. Instead, her restraint left him momentarily adrift, as though he had miscalculated an equation he thought certain. He watched her walk to the door, notebook and scarf in hand, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender tea that had always softened the sterile chill of his office. The door closed gently, not with a slam, but with the soft click of finality. Ethan lowered himself back into his chair. He reached for the black coffee Claire had placed by his right hand, as she had done every morning for 3 years. He lifted it to his lips. The temperature had already cooled, the flavor bitterer than he remembered. She used to balance it with just a trace of cream, not because he had told her, but because she noticed the grimace he gave after his first sip during that first week. Now, no one knew that detail. No one but Claire. The board began murmuring about crisis strategy, about lawyers and public relations. Ethan answered automatically, his voice steady, his eyes focused on the glowing screen. But inside, a disquiet stirred. Outside, the ferry horn sounded again across the gray bay, its echo stretching long and low, like a lament. And on the polished table before him, his untouched coffee cooled further, a small reminder of something already lost. In Seattle's gray dawn, the contrast between two kitchens told two very different stories. High above South Lake Union, Ethan Whitaker's penthouse stretched with polished surfaces and the hum of silence. The kitchen gleamed in brushed steel, its marble counters reflecting the first dull light of morning. Every appliance matched, every utensil was hidden in its place. The air carried no scent except the faint bitterness of black coffee poured straight from a machine calibrated to exact ounces. Ethan leaned against the counter, tie already knotted, cufflinks aligned, the city below reduced to grids and schedules, control, order, perfection. This was his chosen armor, 40 miles south, in Tacoma. Another kitchen stirred. Wooden cabinets bore the marks of time, their edges softened by decades of touch. The scent of cinnamon lingered, mixed with lavender tea steeping in a chipped ceramic pot. Claire Bennett stood by the stove, hair pulled loosely back, her scarf draped across a chair where she had left it the night before. Beside her, Ava Bennett, her mother, sat with a knitted shawl around her shoulders. A morning paper rested folded on the table, unread. Claire poured tea into her mother's favorite mug, steady hands hiding the fatigue in her bones. The warmth of the room came not from symmetry or polish, but from closeness the kind built through years of shared burdens. These two kitchens mirrored their lives. One, a fortress against chaos. The other, a refuge that embraced it. Ethan's life had been shaped years earlier, when his father collapsed in that very penthouse. A sudden heart attack stealing breath from the man who had built Whitaker Dynamics from a garage dream. Ethan was 18. Helplessness seared into his memory like a scar. From that day, he vowed never again to let disorder steal what he loved. He sought control in every aspect. Numbers, contracts, lives around him shaped to fit his vision. To him, emotion was vulnerability. Precision was survival. Claire's discipline was forged differently. Her father's Alzheimer's had crept into their lives slowly, one forgotten key at a time, one repeated question, one long night when he wandered out in the rain until neighbors brought him back. Claire learned that order was not about power, but about protection, systems, routines, and careful notes in her leather-bound planner became lifelines. They allowed her father to live with dignity, her mother to rest, her own heart to manage exhaustion without breaking. To Claire, efficiency was an act of care, not control. The city often whispered about Ethan's relationship with his mother, Marjorie Whittaker. She lived in a stately house overlooking Volunteer Park, surrounded by art she collected after her husband's death. Their conversations were polite, predictable holiday dinners scheduled, birthdays remembered through reminders from assistants. She was proud of his empire, yet mourned the warmth that ambition had cost. Ethan, in turn, admired her elegance, but rarely reached beyond surface gestures. Claire's bond with Ava was another world. Ava worked part-time at Rainier Ridge Senior and Community Center, where she helped seniors with check-ins, organized meal deliveries, and listened to stories that few others had patience for. She brought home the smell of cedar from the building's hallways, mixed with faint disinfectant and fresh bread from volunteers' kitchens. Claire often joined her there, watching her mother comfort strangers with the same steady kindness she offered family. The center became a quiet anchor in their lives, a place where fragility met compassion instead of shame. Objects carried meaning across these worlds. Claire's teal scarf, knit years ago during a winter when her father still recognized faces, still carried his clumsy compliment about the color matching her eyes. Her leather notebook, worn at the corners, held not just Ethan's schedules but her own coded reminders about her father's medication and her mother's shifts. Ethan's tokens were locked away a wooden box in his closet, untouched. Inside, photographs of his father, a pair of glasses, and a slip of paper with words once spoken to him at a workbench. Machines are built to serve people, not replace them. One rainy evening, as the city darkened early, Ethan opened that box. His fingers hovered over the photograph, his father, smiling, grease-stained hands on a prototype robot. For an instant, Ethan heard his voice, gentle yet firm, reminding him of purpose. But the sound collided with boardroom echoes, investor demands, the constant reminder that weakness cost millions. With a sharp breath, he closed the box before touching anything. Control demanded distance. In Tacoma. Claire draped her scarf over a chair and opened her notebook, writing quietly while her mother hummed near the sink. She sketched the week-ahead doctor visits, her mother's shifts, bills due, outside. The rain tapped the roof in a steady rhythm. She paused to sip lavender tea, its warmth grounding her, her gaze lingering on the photo of her father, smiling on the mantel. Discipline had become her way of keeping him present, even as his memory slipped further. The ferry horn echoed again across Elliott Bay, distant but insistent. Its sound threaded through both homes, connecting lives that did not yet realize how deeply bound they were. One man sought order to erase grief. One woman sought order to protect love. Their worlds were parallel, separate, and destined to collide again. And in the silence of his penthouse, Ethan looked once more at the closed box, while in the warmth of her kitchen, Claire pressed her pen to paper. The day was only beginning. The headline broke just after dawn. A glossy photo of Whittaker Dynamics Tower filled the screen of every tech blog inside the ruthless culture of Seattle's robotics giant. The article told the story of a secretary dismissed in front of an entire board, framed as a symbol of leadership gone cold. The writer claimed the source was anonymous, but the tone carried the intimacy of someone who had been there. It spread quickly. LinkedIn shares, whispered Slack threads, podcasts hungry for controversy. Ethan's face stared back from the banner image, jaw set, eyes steel gray, the caption branding him as the icy CEO. Ethan scrolled through the piece in silence. No names, no dates, but enough detail to wound. His coffee sat untouched, cooling as it had the day before. By mid-morning, the first emails arrived. Investors, some polite, some blunt. How do you plan to reassure us that Whittaker Dynamics maintains ethical leadership? Another asked directly, if culture is cracking, can we trust your recall response? The timing was merciless. The recall itself grew messier each hour. A warehouse client in Oregon reported a halt in operations, citing safety risks. Supply chains jammed like clogged arteries. Transport trucks idled. Workers sat on benches waiting for instructions. One client threatened litigation if penalties weren't paid within the week. Ethan stared at the red alerts stacking across his dashboard. Meetings shifted, calls piled, schedules fractured. Without Claire's silent architecture, reminders were missed, conflicts collided. A calendar invite for a city partnership, a briefing on disaster relief logistics slipped unnoticed. By the time Ethan realized, the mayor's office had already sent a formal note of disappointment. Whitaker Dynamics was expected to support emergency warehousing after a landslide in Pierce County. Instead, their absence was glaring. Inside the glass tower, unease spread. Employees whispered in elevators, glancing at headlines on their phones. Some avoided Ethan's eyes. Others watched with a mix of fear and fascination. The man who once seemed untouchable now looked like he was standing on sand that shifted with every step. That afternoon, while rain tapped rhythmically against the conference room windows, the board gathered without Ethan. Howard Blake's voice was steady, but his words cut sharp. We cannot allow a leadership crisis to compound a technical crisis. If Mr. Whitaker does not stabilize operations within 30 days, we will consider measures to limit his authority. The decision was unanimous. Ethan learned of it in the form of a letter delivered to his desk. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, embossed with the board's seal. He broke it open with a practiced hand, but slowed as he read. 30 days, correct course, or your role will be formally reviewed. He read it twice, then a third time. The words blurred slightly as if the paper itself trembled. For a man who had built his life on control, the ultimatum tasted bitter. The evening stretched long. Employees filtered out. Jackets pulled tight against the drizzle. Umbrellas bobbing like dark flowers on the street below. The tower quieted. Only the hum of servers and the faint echo of the ferry horn reminded Ethan that the world still moved. He remained in the boardroom, its vast table empty, but for his laptop and the pulsing red lights of project delays. Each notification was a small wound, shipments late, clients restless, costs rising. He pinched the bridge of his nose, the gesture one of fatigue more than thought. The silence pressed in. He replayed Claire's calm face as she left no tears, no argument, just dignity. For the first time, he wondered if the anonymous article's voice had been hers, though he knew she would never betray confidentiality. Still, the absence of her steadying presence echoed louder than the rain outside. The ferry horn sounded again across Elliott Bay. This time, its call was sharper, almost urgent. On the dashboard before him, another red light blinked, then another. The dominoes were falling, one by one, faster than he could steady them. And Ethan Whitaker sat alone in the vast glass room, the city lights bleeding through rain-streaked windows. A man who had always believed no one was irreplaceable until the evidence against him glowed in crimson across his screen. The first sign of absence came in something as small as a misplaced file. A new temporary assistant stood uncertainly by Ethan's office door, clutching a stack of folders like a student with too many books. Mr. Whitaker, I can't find the vendor contracts. I tried the shared drive, but nothing matches. The colors on the tabs meant nothing to her. Blue for legal, green for logistics, red for urgent correspondence. Claire had built the system so seamlessly that Ethan never had to think about it. Now, with the rhythm broken, the folders seemed like a foreign language. Ethan waved the assistant off, irritation hidden under restraint. He pulled one folder open himself, only to realize he didn't know which version was final. Claire would have placed the right draft at the top, a small note clipped to the corner with his initials in neat script. Instead, he stared at 3 drafts, each slightly different, none marked. That morning's coffee was another reminder. Too bitter, poured without cream. Ethan took one sip and set it down, his mouth tightening. It was a minor detail, almost laughable. Yet the memory of Claire noticing his grimace 3 years earlier returned. She had never asked, never interrupted. She had simply adjusted, and from then on, his coffee had arrived balanced to his taste. Now, the bitterness lingered as if mocking him. The revolving door of replacements turned quickly. One assistant lasted a week, another only 2 days. A third left mid-morning after a tense exchange about overlapping calls. None understood the rhythm. None anticipated the gaps. They followed checklists, but Claire had lived the undercurrent, the timing of when to interrupt, when to let silence settle, when to have documents ready before he asked. By the third week, mistakes stacked like bricks. Ethan missed a call with the city council about transportation permits. He double-booked 2 investor luncheons. Then, on a gray Tuesday, Marjorie's number flashed across his phone. He let it ring, buried in a spreadsheet. Hours later, he saw her message. "Today is your father's anniversary. I hoped you'd remember." The weight of forgetting pressed harder than any meeting. For years, Claire had noted that day quietly, lightening his schedule, placing a fresh photo of his father on the corner of his desk. He had never asked her to. She had simply understood. Without her, the memory slipped through the cracks, and the guilt hollowed him. Gabe Rowland, his COO and oldest friend, finally confronted him. They sat in the strategy room, the long table scattered with missed memos. Gabe leaned back, arms crossed. "Ethan, losing Claire isn't about paperwork. You lost your nervous system. She wasn't just pushing documents, she was coordinating your life. You think you fired a secretary? What you fired was the rhythm that kept this machine alive." Ethan didn't answer. He reached for Claire's old planner instead. It had been boxed with her belongings, but one copy remained in the office safe. When he opened it, the layers stunned him. His calendar, once invisible, was revealed in her handwriting. Tiny notations along the margins, reminders to call Marjorie, cues to pause between back-to-back meetings, highlighted breaks disguised as travel time. Even his meals had been folded in without fanfare. Every margin carried proof of her unseen labor. The real blow came during a client negotiation. Ethan strode into a conference call, convinced it was scheduled for Thursday. It was, in fact, set for Tuesday. By the time he connected, the client had already left, insulted by his absence. A penalty clause triggered automatically, costing Whitaker Dynamics hundreds of thousands. For the first time in years, Ethan admitted the truth aloud, his voice echoing in the empty boardroom. "This was my mistake." The words felt foreign. He was used to blaming systems, markets, or competitors. But this, he realized, was human error his own. That night, he lingered in his office long after the tower emptied. Rain streaked the glass, neon reflections smearing across the streets below. His eyes drifted to the desk across from his. Claire's desk, clean now, barren. The small succulent she once tended sat shriveled, its soil dry, leaves curling into brittle husks. No one had watered it. No one had cared enough. He stood, crossing the silent floor, and touched the edge of her desk. The wood felt colder than he remembered. The emptiness was not loud. It was quiet, steady, undeniable, a space that refused to be filled by anyone else. The wooden doors of Rainier Ridge opened with a gentle creak, releasing the smell of waffles and brewed coffee into the damp Tacoma air. Inside, the morning bustled with soft energy. Elderly residents in sneakers moved slowly through Tai Chi poses, their arms rising and falling like waves. Laughter rippled when one man lost his balance and exaggerated the stumble for comic effect. Light streamed through tall windows, pooling on worn linoleum floors that carried decades of footsteps. Claire stepped inside, notebook in hand, scarf tucked into her coat. The air was warmer here, scented with cinnamon and cedar polish. She exhaled without realizing she had been holding her breath since leaving the freeway. Here, no one whispered about headlines or boardrooms. Here, she was simply Claire. Her mother, Ava, appeared from the kitchen, shawl draped loosely over her shoulders. In her hand, she carried a ceramic mug, steam curled upward, fragrant with lavender. She pressed it into Claire's palm. "Sit, rest a minute." The words landed with weight. For years, Claire had trained herself to move without pause, to anticipate, to disappear behind efficiency. Now, with her mother's hand on her arm, she allowed herself to stop. She sipped. The tea was floral, calming, a reminder that care could flow both ways. Work soon followed, but in a different form. Claire sat at a folding table scattered with binders and loose papers. She organized schedules for exercise classes, card games, medication reminders. She built a color-coded system easy for aging eyes, yellow for social, blue for health, green for family visits. The markers bled slightly on the pages, leaving soft halos of color. Residents stopped by, curious, grateful. Now I know when bingo is without squinting. One man chuckled, tapping his new schedule pinned to the corkboard. Word of her skills spread quietly. A staff member asked if she could help reorganize intake forms. Then another requested advice on tracking volunteers. Within weeks, 2 small nonprofits in Tacoma reached out, hoping for consulting. Claire accepted cautiously. Each meeting felt different from the corporate halls she once walked. No polished marble, no glass walls, just mismatched chairs, cheerful clutter, and people who looked her in the eye with thanks. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as an efficient shadow, but as a person whose work mattered. Her father's presence lingered everywhere. Some mornings, he recognized her smile. Other days, his eyes drifted past her as if she were a stranger. Claire learned to soften around the gaps. She stopped correcting him when he mistook dates, choosing instead to listen. She found patience in repetition, in the rhythm of reminding him who she was. I'm Claire, Dad, your daughter. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes not. She held his hand anyway. One afternoon, a resident named Mrs. Donovan grew distressed. She clutched a paper, convinced she had missed her medical appointment. In truth, she had confused Tuesday with Thursday. Claire knelt beside her, smoothing the paper with calm hands. It's tomorrow. You're early, not late. Relief spread across the woman's lined face, eyes shining with unshed tears. She whispered, "Thank you. I hate feeling useless." Claire felt her own eyes sting. In that moment, she understood usefulness was not about perfection. It was about presence. About being there to catch someone before they fell too deep into fear. That evening, after the building quieted and the smell of dinner faded, Claire checked her email. Among routine notes, one message stood out. The subject line read, "Thank you." It was from the director of Rainier Ridge. The text was simple. Your scheduling system has lifted a burden for staff and residents alike. We see the difference already. Grateful for your heart and your hands. No mention of profit margins. No metrics. Just gratitude. Claire read it twice, then again. Her chest warmed with something she hadn't felt in a long time. This was not recognition tied to someone else's empire. It was acknowledgement of her own worth. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. Claire closed her laptop, wrapped her scarf around her neck, and turned off the office light. The building smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. As she stepped into the cool night air, she carried the email in her thoughts like a lantern, and for the first time since leaving the glass tower, she felt the path ahead begin to glow. Rain swept across Elliott Bay, streaking the windows of Ethan's penthouse with silver lines. The city lights blurred into a watery haze. Down at the docks, ferry horns groaned through the night, their voices long and low, a reminder that the world moved even when he stood still. In the quiet kitchen, Ethan reached for a jar of lavender leaves. He poured hot water into a mug, letting the steam curl upward. The smell was floral, soft, too fragile for the steel and marble that surrounded him. He waited, timed the steeping as he remembered, then took a careful sip. The bitterness caught on his tongue. Something was wrong. He tried again, adding honey this time, then lemon, then nothing. Each attempt failed. The memory of Claire's version lingered sharp in contrast, balanced, calm, just enough sweetness to soften the edge. He set the mug down with a quiet thud. For the first time in years, a drink defeated him. Later, at his desk, he unlocked the drawer where Claire's old planner rested. The leather cover was softened from years of handling, edges frayed like a well-loved book. When he opened it, the pages carried her handwriting in layers, his schedules outlined neatly, but also margins filled with notes he had never noticed. Leave 10 minutes buffer. He tenses if rushed. Reminder call. Marjorie keeps short. She feels neglected if not heard. Watch for fatigue after long investor meetings, schedule silence. Each entry was less about tasks and more about him. She had not only managed his calendar, she had managed his humanity, quietly, without his knowing. His chest tightened. The realization felt both intimate and invasive, as though she had mapped the vulnerabilities he refused to admit. The rain grew heavier. He closed the planner, pressing his palm flat against its cover, as if to keep the truth from spilling further. The next day, he met his mother for dinner at her home near Volunteer Park. Marjorie poured wine into 2 glasses, her movements precise, her eyes sharp. They sat across from each other at the long oak table. Conversation turned to business as always, until she set her glass down with a soft click. "Ethan," she said, her voice firm, "you win out there." She gestured vaguely toward the city skyline, the towers glowing through rain. "But you lose in here." She touched her chest. "Your father knew machines, but he never forgot people. She paused, eyes narrowing. "You've built walls so high, I don't know if anyone can reach you anymore." He shifted in his chair, gaze dropping to the wine. "Control keeps things from falling apart." Her response was swift. "Control keeps you alone." The silence stretched. For once, Ethan had no defense. Back at the tower, Gabe waited in the strategy room. Stacks of reports lay across the table, numbers bleeding red. He leaned forward, voice low. "You've got 30 days. The board won't bluff this time. They'll cut your wings if you don't change." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Change what the market doesn't forgive weakness." Gabe's eyes held his. "It's not the market that's breaking you. It's you. People follow leaders they trust, not machines that calculate." The words stayed with him long after Gabe left. That night, Ethan sat by the window as rain lashed against the glass. He opened the wooden box he had avoided for years. Inside, his father's glasses rested on a folded handkerchief, a photograph tucked beside them. In the picture, his father stood at a workbench, grease on his hands, smiling as if nothing in the world mattered more than the machine beside him. Ethan remembered the words spoken that day. Machines are meant to serve people, not replace them. But after his father's sudden death, Ethan had built his empire on the opposite principle. He avoided intimacy, convinced it was weakness. He dismissed emotions, convinced they distracted from success. And when Claire had become too close, too knowing, too essential, he had cut her off rather than risk dependence. The truth crashed in with the storm. His fear of loss, born the night his father's heart failed, had guided every decision since. It had driven him to protect control above connection. And in doing so, he had lost the one person who understood him best. He lifted the mug of lavender tea again, now cold. He set it down, untouched. Silence filled the room, heavy but not empty. It spoke to him of regrets unspoken, of changes not yet made. For the first time, Ethan admitted inwardly he needed to see Claire, not as an employee to restore his comfort, not as a problem to solve, but as someone to whom he owed an apology. The storm outside calmed, the rain easing to a softer rhythm. Ethan closed the planner gently, pushed the mug aside, and leaned back in his chair. His decision was quiet, simple, firm. He would go to her. The hallways of Rainier Ridge were quiet at dusk. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above, their glow muted against the fading orange of evening. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something sweeter baked bread, cinnamon perhaps, lingering from dinner. Most residents had retreated to their rooms, leaving wheelchairs parked neatly along the walls. Ethan stood just inside the entrance, beneath a sign that read in bold letters, "Community is home." He studied the words as though they held instructions. His coat was damp from the drizzle outside. He clutched a folder in one hand, not for business, but because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Claire appeared at the far end of the hall, carrying a stack of brightly colored charts. Her scarf trailed lightly behind her, teal against the muted walls. When she saw him, her steps slowed, her face unreadable. She stopped a few feet away. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her tone was calm, not hostile, but lined with distance. Ethan cleared his throat. "I came to talk, if you'll allow it." She considered him for a long moment, then motioned toward an empty lounge. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cedar and old upholstery. A piano rested in the corner, its lid closed. They sat across from each other, a low table between them. The silence stretched. Finally, Ethan spoke. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of the boardroom's edge. "I've spent my life believing control was strength, that if I managed every detail, nothing could hurt me. When my father died, I swore I'd never let chaos take something from me again. That fear, it's ruled me more than I admitted. It made me cold. It made me blind." Claire held his gaze, her expression steady. "Blind is the right word. 3 years by your side, Ethan. 3 years of anticipating every meeting, every call, every detail, and still I was invisible to you. Do you know what it feels like to give everything of yourself and remain unseen?" Her words pierced, sharper than any boardroom rebuke. He shifted, pressing his palms together. "I see it now. Too late. Maybe. But I see it." Claire shook her head gently. "Seeing it isn't enough. You can't fix years of disregard with one apology." He leaned forward slightly, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Tell me what I can do." Her answer came without hesitation. "Time, consistency. You don't prove change with words. Ethan, you prove it by how you live, day after day." She paused, letting the weight settle. "And if you're imagining we go back to the way things were, me as your secretary, you as the CEO who barely notices me, that will never happen again. That chapter is closed." The truth of it hit him harder than he expected. He had come prepared to apologize, but part of him had still clung to the idea of restoring the familiar. Now, the path ahead was foreign, uncertain. She continued, her voice soft but firm. "If there's any future for us, professional, personal, whatever it might be, it has to be built differently. Equal footing, respect that isn't silent, but visible." The quiet stretched again, broken only by the ticking of a wall clock. Ethan let her words sink in. He thought of the planner filled with her hidden notes, the coffee she balanced just right, the anniversary she remembered for him, all the ways she had carried him invisibly. He realized with a jolt that her demand wasn't for romance or reconciliation. It was for dignity, for proof that he could honor her as a person, not just a function. Finally, she added one last condition. "Don't make promises tonight. Don't say you'll change. Prove it in how you live. Otherwise, don't come back." The line was clear, a boundary drawn in permanent ink. Ethan exhaled slowly, nodding. "I understand." They rose. She gathered her charts, hugging them to her chest. He stood with empty hands, the folder he had carried forgotten on the chair. As he walked back through the hallway, past the wheelchairs and quiet rooms, he felt lighter and heavier all at once. Claire had not forgiven him, not yet, but she had given him a path, however narrow. At the front desk, a volunteer slid a laminated card across the counter. "New registration for volunteers," she said. Ethan looked down. His name was printed in bold letters, Whitaker, Ethan, beside it, the word volunteer. He slipped the card into his pocket as he stepped out into the drizzle. Rain tapped softly on his shoulders. For once, he didn't rush. The ferry horn echoed faintly from the bay, and Ethan tightened his grip on the card. It was not a contract. It was not control. It was the beginning of something slower, harder, and real. The volunteer badge was smooth between Ethan's fingers, still stiff from the printer. He clipped it to his shirt, the word volunteer standing out in block letters. It felt strange. He was used to titles embossed in gold: CEO, founder, chairman. Now, just one word, printed in black ink, plain as it came. His first task was shelving books in the community library at Rainier Ridge. The room smelled of old paper and cedar wood polish. He crouched by the lowest shelf, sliding large print mysteries into neat rows. His knees complained, but he stayed there, grounding himself in the dust and silence. No one applauded, no one noticed. That was the point. The days began to fall into a pattern. Monday evenings, he sorted donated clothes by size, folding sweaters softened by years of wear. Wednesdays, he showed residents how to hold a tablet, how to swipe gently, how to enlarge the words on the screen. He caught himself speaking too quickly and slowed down, repeating each step until patience took root. At first, some seniors eyed him warily. They saw the expensive watch, the polished shoes, but over time, suspicion thinned. They began to wave when he entered, not with deference, but with familiarity. At his company, he worked to carry the lessons inward. The glossy tower downtown no longer ran at the breakneck pace he had once demanded. He restructured the workflow, cutting the layers of approval that had made every decision brittle. He hired a new assistant, not a sharp 20-something fresh from business school, but a woman in her 50s who had raised 3 children and managed a nonprofit office. Her desk bore photos of her grandchildren. When she reminded him of an overlooked meeting, he thanked her aloud. He introduced a feedback circle where employees spoke candidly. At first, the room was stiff, wary. Then, one by one, they shared frustrations about long hours, about being unseen. Ethan listened without defense. He wrote the notes himself, not delegating, as if engraving them into his own memory. Outside of both worlds, he remembered Ava, quietly. He sent daisies to her door each week, no card signed with his name, just a simple message. Thank you for what you do. He pictured her setting them in a jar on the kitchen table, the yellow petals catching light. Gratitude needed no spotlight. Still, not everyone believed him. Business journals published skeptical pieces. Is the CEO's volunteer stint genuine, or calculated photos of him stacking books were circulated with captions questioning motives? The board tightened oversight, setting stricter benchmarks. Every move he made was measured against suspicion. One rainy Thursday during a computer basics class, Ethan sat beside Mr. Thompson, a retired dock worker with hands stiff from arthritis. The man had refused help before, muttering that he was too old for gadgets. This time, Ethan didn't press. He simply opened the email app and let the silence stretch. Finally, Mr. Thompson leaned closer. My granddaughter keeps asking me to check my email. She says she sent pictures. His voice cracked with embarrassment. I've never seen a single one. Ethan showed him slowly, letter by letter, how to type the password. The screen filled with unread messages. Mr. Thompson clicked the first, and a photo opened a girl in a soccer jersey, waving at the camera. His lips trembled. That's her, he whispered. For a long moment, the old man just stared, the glow of the screen reflecting in his damp eyes. Then he looked at Ethan differently, less like a stranger in a tailored suit, more like someone who had given him back a piece of his life. That night, Ethan lay awake replaying the moment. It was not profit margins or headlines. It was one man seeing his granddaughter's face for the first time through a screen. A connection restored, a thread tied back. Across the hall the next week, Claire noticed him. She had come to deliver a new calendar for the residents, the pages marked with bold colors she had chosen for clarity. Through the glass door of the library, she saw Ethan kneeling beside Mr. Thompson again, pointing at the mouse with gentle patience. She did not smile. Her face remained composed, distant, but she did not turn away either. She watched for a breath longer, then moved on. It was a fragile shift, a crack in the wall she had built. Not forgiveness, not even warmth, but absence of rejection. For Ethan, that was enough for now. He carried the volunteer card in his wallet, not as proof for others, but as a reminder for himself. Each time he touched it, he remembered dust on his knees, folded sweaters, and an old man seeing his granddaughter's smile. The rain kept falling in Seattle, steady against glass towers and wooden porches alike. For the first time in years, Ethan did not try to control it. He simply let it wash over him, cleansing quietly. The wind howled against Tacoma's rooftops that night, trees bent, branches snapping in the dark. At Rainier Ridge, a spark leapt unseen behind a wall socket. Within minutes, smoke curled along the ceiling of the memory care wing. Alarms shrieked. Volunteers and staff rushed to guide residents into the main hall. The air grew thick with the smell of burning plastic and singed carpet. Flames licked across a row of photo displays, erasing smiling faces in seconds. By dawn, the fire was under control, but the damage was plain. The community hall was gutted, chairs charred to skeleton frames. The memory therapy room, once filled with puzzles and familiar songs, lay blackened. The loss weighed heavier than the soot. For the residents, these spaces were not just walls. They were anchors to dignity, connection, safety. News spread quickly. Families crowded the parking lot, clutching blankets, asking where their loved ones would sleep. Volunteers whispered about relocation. Fear rippled through the town. What would happen now, with winter closing in? A town hall was called the very afternoon. Folding chairs lined the gymnasium of the nearby high school. The room buzzed with unease. Murmurs rose about costs, liability, survival. Then the doors opened. Ethan stepped inside. He wasn't in a polished suit this time. His coat was still damp, his shoes smudged with ash from visiting the site. The murmurs hushed as he walked to the front. He didn't carry a presentation or charts, only his voice. "I know fear is heavy tonight," he began, the microphone catching the rasp in his throat. "You've lost a place that meant more than walls, and I can't bring back what burned, but I can help rebuild." He paused, scanning faces lined with grief, with doubt. "My company will commit $6 million to reconstruct Rainier Ridge. Not just bricks and paint, but modern safety systems, new therapy rooms, and space that honors what was lost. On top of that, we'll provide a 5-year operational fund, so this center never has to wonder if it can keep its lights on. And we'll fund vocational training for caregivers, because people, not buildings, carry the heart of this work." Gasps filled the hall. Some leaned forward, searching his face for calculation. Others clutched hands, hope and suspicion wrestling in their eyes. Ethan continued, his voice steady but unpolished. "I've spent years chasing control, believing that if I managed enough, nothing could slip through my fingers. But control doesn't heal. It doesn't comfort. What matters is service choosing to lift others when the ground gives way beneath them." He drew a breath, his chest tight. "I've made mistakes. I drove away someone who mattered deeply because I was blind to her worth. That blindness cost me more than I can measure. I won't pretend a check fixes that. But I can choose differently now. I can use what I have to serve, not to dominate." The words hung in the gym like smoke thinning after a blaze. "From the back," a woman whispered. "Maybe he means it," another answered. "We'll see." Reporters scribbled quickly, cameras flashed, not for scandal this time, but for witness. By evening, the local newspaper carried a front-page photo. CEO pledges to rebuild Rainier Ridge. The headline did not drip with cynicism. It carried a note of possibility. Outside the gym, the wind had softened. Residents leaned on canes and walkers, murmuring about brighter rooms, safer halls. Volunteers spoke of hope, tentative but real. Behind the stage, Claire had stood quietly by a side door. She had come to ensure the residents' concerns were heard, not expecting Ethan. She pressed a hand to her teal scarf, the thread soft against her skin, the same scarf she had worn on the day he let her go. Hearing his words, she felt something shift inside. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was recognition that he had chosen to stand before strangers, not hiding behind press releases, not armoring himself with jargon. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, steadying herself. She could not step forward, not yet. Too much had cracked between them, but she also did not turn away. Her fingers lingered on the scarf as the crowd dispersed, as Ethan shook hands with city officials, as reporters called his name. She stayed behind the door, letting the wood shield her, her breath shallow. For the first time in months, her heart whispered something she hadn't allowed, that maybe people could change, that maybe some fires cleanse as much as they destroy. But she stayed hidden, letting the night close around her. The construction site buzzed with hammer strikes and the hum of machinery. Dust lifted in the afternoon light, shimmering in shafts of sun that broke through Seattle's gray. Ethan adjusted the stiff gloves on his hands and bent to lift a stack of bricks. The weight pressed into his arms, foreign yet grounding. Sweat darkened his collar. No suit today, just work boots, jeans, and a borrowed helmet. He moved among carpenters and masons, not issuing orders, but carrying what they carried. Each brick added to the wall felt like a small confession laid in mortar, on breaks. He sat with the caregivers who knew the residents best. Around a folding table, he listened as they described what each room had once meant. The memory wing needs wide windows, one nurse said. Sunlight helps calm them. Another added, clear color coding, blue doors for therapy, green for rest. Consistency matters when the mind slips. Ethan wrote every word down, filling a notebook with their voices, not his own. When asked which space should be prioritized, he didn't hesitate. The Alzheimer's rooms first, he said. They carried my father's shadow too. The team nodded, recognizing the sincerity. Claire arrived often to coordinate logistics. She wore practical shoes, her hair tied back, her scarf tucked against the dust. She no longer stood apart from him, though distance still framed her posture. She repeated what she had said before. They were not returning to old roles. No employer and employee. If there was to be a future, it had to be as two independent people, equal in worth. Ethan accepted it without resistance. He stopped trying to fill silence with promises. Instead, he showed up on time, stayed late, carried his share. When mistakes happened, and they did, he resisted the old urge to find fault. One afternoon, a shipment of lumber was left uncovered. Rain soaked the planks overnight, warping several beyond use. The foreman braced for blame, but Ethan stepped forward. "That was mine to check," he said plainly. "I'll arrange replacement by morning." And he did, driving across town himself, speaking with suppliers until fresh wood arrived. The crew noticed, Claire noticed. The rhythm of building became its own form of penance. He learned the texture of wet cement, the rasp of sawdust, the ache of kneeling to measure. His hands blistered, then hardened. Each mark reminded him he was capable of more than directing from a glass office. One evening, as shadows stretched across the nearly framed hall, Claire lingered in the temporary office space. A small kettle steamed beside a chipped mug. She placed a sprig of lavender into the pot, the scent rising soft and steady. Ethan entered quietly, dust still clinging to his sleeves. He washed his hands at the sink, then poured water into the mug. This time, he measured with patience, not rushing. He let the lavender steep, stirring slowly. When he handed the cup to Claire, she took a sip. The flavor was gentle, balanced. Her eyes lifted in surprise. "You got it right," she said, her tone neutral, but softer than before. Ethan only nodded, a quiet smile crossing his face. He didn't need to declare victory. It was enough that, for the first time, she drank without grimacing. The new office smelled faintly of lavender and fresh timber. Outside, the sound of hammers still echoed, but inside, silence held a different weight, not awkward, not hostile, simply space. Claire set the cup down carefully, her fingers brushing the rim. She did not thank him. He did not ask for acknowledgement. Both understood the moment for what it was, a small step toward trust, built not on speeches, but on labor shared and patience kept. The ribbon fluttered to the floor as scissors clicked shut. Applause rose, warm and steady, filling the newly rebuilt reading room. Sunlight poured through the wide glass windows, striking the fresh wood shelves lined with large print books and donated novels. Dust motes drifted like golden confetti in the air. Residents shuffled in, some leaning on walkers, others holding the arms of volunteers. Their eyes widened at the sight of bright walls, wide hallways, and clear color-coded doors. For many, it felt like coming home again. Ethan stood at the front, his hands resting against the podium. He wasn't in a suit, but a simple blazer. The microphone caught his steady breath. "When we rebuild walls, we have the chance to rebuild what they mean," he began. "This center is more than wood and paint. It is safety, memory, dignity." He paused, glancing toward Claire, who sat beside her mother. Her scarf glowed teal against the soft light. "To honor those who care every day, quietly, without recognition. We are establishing the Lavender Fund," he continued. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "It will provide financial support, counseling, and respite programs for caregivers of memory patients." Inspired, his voice softened, by the simple act of lavender tea, gentle, steady, reminding us that care is made of small things done with love. The room held its breath. Then applause swelled again. Deeper now, not for a check, but for the sentiment behind it. Claire lowered her gaze, fingers brushing her scarf. She knew the message was meant for her, though it was given to everyone. Later, the board gathered quietly in the corner, nodding in rare agreement. One member, long skeptical, shook Ethan's hand. "Leadership that serves, not controls, that's your future. You keep the seat, but share the table." And Ethan had. The company's metrics had shifted. Not just profit, but hours of rest given, meals shared, families supported, KPIs written in human ink, not just numbers. Employees had begun to stay longer, smile more. Change was visible, not in stock charts alone, but in the halls of the tower itself. As the ceremony thinned, laughter echoed from children exploring the hall. Balloons bobbed along the ceiling. Volunteers carried trays of cookies. The smell of fresh varnish mixed with lavender sachets placed in corners. Claire lingered by the staff office. On the wall, a teal scarf, hers, carefully washed and framed, hung beside a small plaque. "Warmth is remembered." She reached out and touched the fabric. The texture pulled her back through rain and fire and long nights. She swallowed, her throat tight. Footsteps approached. Ethan stood beside her, not too close. He didn't speak right away. Together they looked at the scarf, the sunlight on wood, the empty chairs waiting to be filled with stories. Finally, his voice came quiet. "I don't want to return to what was. I want to build what can be. Not as your boss, not as someone who needs rescuing, but as a man asking if you'll let me walk beside you, at your pace, with respect for your work, your life, your own ground." The air carried lavender, faint and steady. Claire turned, her eyes steady on him. She thought of nights unseen, of years invisible. She thought too of bricks carried, of hands blistered, of lavender brewed patiently until the taste was right. Her hand rested on the framed scarf a moment longer. Then she nodded, a small movement, but certain. "A chance," she said softly. Relief flickered across Ethan's face, not triumphant, but grateful. He didn't reach for her. He simply let the moment breathe. The reading room door closed gently behind them as they stepped back into the hallway. Laughter of children drifted down, mingled with the scent of wood and lavender. For once, the future did not rush them. It opened slowly, like sunlight spreading across a floor, steady and warm. The sky over Elliott Bay burned with hues of gold and rose. Clouds stretched thin, lit from beneath, their edges glowing as the sun slid toward the horizon. The ferry moved steadily across the water, its horn sounding long and low, a voice both ancient and familiar. On the balcony of a modest apartment, 2 mugs of lavender tea steamed in the cool evening air. Claire wrapped her hands around hers, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. Ethan mirrored her gesture, the fragrance soft between them. No grand speeches, no stage lights, just quiet. Inside, on the table, lay a stack of letters. Claire had spent the afternoon reading them aloud, notes from families who had walked the halls of Rainier Ridge, who had watched their loved ones return to bright, safe rooms. Some were scrawled in shaky handwriting, others typed carefully, each carrying gratitude in simple words. You gave us back our Sundays. You made Mom feel seen again. Ethan, for his part, had begun his own practice. A notebook rested open, its pages filled not with corporate strategies, but with lists, small tasks, one for each day. Check in with the volunteers. Water the plants by Claire's desk. Pause before speaking. Ordinary commitments, steady as bricks. Their days unfolded not with fireworks, but with choices. Ethan learned the rhythm of steeping tea until the balance was right every time. Claire walked beside him along the ferry docks, the smell of salt air threading through their conversations. Together, they visited the memory wing, greeting residents, listening to stories that repeated, sometimes twice in a row. They didn't correct, they simply listened. The wealth Ethan carried no longer showed in glass towers or tailored suits. It showed in how he leaned down to tie a resident's shoe, in how he paused to carry groceries for a neighbor. It showed in choosing to measure worth not by scale or profit, but by how many people breathe easier because of his presence. Claire's healing was quieter, slower. She watched for patterns. Would he drift back to control, to the old armor of command? But as weeks passed, she saw the change wasn't a performance. It was a discipline, a turning of soil, day after day, until trust began to take root. One evening, she touched her teal scarf, now hanging by the door, not as a wound but as a reminder. Warmth remembered. She looked at Ethan and saw not perfection, but persistence. And persistence was enough. The climax of their story was not a single dramatic moment, but a peace earned through storms weathered. A man who had built walls learning instead to serve. A woman who had been unseen finding herself recognized, not in speeches, but in shared life. As twilight deepened, children's laughter drifted from the street below. The world carried on, ordinary and alive. Claire leaned back, her tea cooling in her hands. Funny, she said softly, how healing doesn't come as a miracle. Just small changes, steady enough to stay. Ethan nodded. Wealth isn't what we hold, it's who we hold. The ferry horn echoed again, rolling over the bay. Both of them fell silent, letting the sound settle. It was not a call to leave, but a reminder of journeys, departures, returns, and the space in between where lives are rebuilt. On the table inside, a card lay waiting. The new volunteer schedule for the month ahead, Ethan's name printed beside Claire's, side by side. The page turned in the wind, fluttering once before resting, and the question lingered, quiet but insistent, for anyone listening to their story. When the storm passes, what will you choose to build, control or care? In the end, Ethan's journey is not only about love regained, but about the quiet shift from control to care. His story reminds us that true wealth does not rest in titles, possessions, or power. It lives in how we treat the people around us, the way we listen, the way we notice, the way we choose patience over pride. So many of us, especially in later years, know the ache of invisibility. We have given our best to families, to workplaces, to communities often without recognition. Claire's courage to demand respect speaks to anyone who has ever felt unseen. And Ethan's willingness to change shows that it is never too late to grow softer, wiser, more human. Life rarely changes in grand gestures. It heals in the steady rhythm of small acts, a cup of tea brewed with care, a word spoken with kindness, a mistake owned without excuse. These are the choices that rebuild trust, restore dignity, and keep love alive, for all of us. The lesson is simple, yet demanding. Let us measure our success not by what we control, but by the lives we touch. And let us remember, every act of service is an act of love. Thank you for spending your precious time with Shining Stories. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep bringing you stories of hope, healing, and love.